First thing first, what is A, B, and C?
1, 4, and 45.
1, 4, and negative 45. So I always like to start with making my box because in my experience, that's the part that kids struggle with. But I think in integrated 3, you all have had 3 years in math, so I think you all are catching on a lot faster than my students I had last year. So x squared goes here. And then C always goes at a diagonal. Okay. And then we need to find our two numbers. Two numbers that multiply to give you A times C, which is negative 45, and adds to 4. Don't say it out loud, but just give me a thumbs up if you think you know my two numbers. I'm not going to call on you. I just want to see who knows my numbers. Got a couple people that know it, maybe 3 people. If you're not sure, you can look at your chart, look at your multiplication chart, find 45. I'll give you a couple minutes. Figure out where you see 45. I think you should see it. You should see it in the 3s, and you should see it in the 5s. 45. Let me see. Is it in the 3s? Yeah. Yeah, you should see it in the 3s, and you should see it in the 5s. So my options are, to get 45, I could do 3 times 15, or I could do what? What's the other option to get 45? What'd you say? Yes. Sorry, I get confused a little bit. You're right. All right, which one of those pairs do you think we're going to use, though? 5 times 9, because if you subtract that, you see you get 4. 15 minus 3 is 12, but 9 minus 5 is 4. So one of these has to be negative, though. Which one of those numbers will be negative? The 9 or the 5? What'd you say, Isa? The 5, yep. So one thing I have thought about is whatever sign this is, you see how this is positive? The biggest number is going to match that sign. So 9 is bigger than 5, so that means the 9 has to be positive. These two numbers are positive. So let's go ahead and put those two in the other square. So we got a 9x. And we have a negative 5x. And when you're looking at the factors, who had Miss Jane last year for integrated 2? Okay, so Miss Jane would have you all write the factors down in the boxes. Do y'all remember that? And you would find the GCF. So one of my students last year said, can you do it like Miss Jane? I said, I sure can. Or not last year, yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and make this little grid, because your first test is next Wednesday and you have 2 factoring questions on there. So I'm just going to make it this way. Now, if you don't need this chart, then you do not have to write this down. But this is for the person that struggles to find the GCF. So I'm going to go ahead and write what you have, what you really have in each box. So in this box, you have a 1, a X, and an X. In this box, you have either 3 times 3 times X, or you have 9 times 1 times X. For the 5, the only thing that can multiply to give you 5 is 5 times 1, or 1 times 5. And then for 15, you have either 1 times 45, or you could have 3 times 15, or you can have 9 times 5. All right, so now that we have that copied down, and again, this is just for those who struggle with factoring. This might help you. Let's look for our GCFs. So in these 2 squares, what do they both have that I can take out? The only thing that they have in both of these squares is a 1 and an x. That's it. That's the only thing that they have in common. So I'm going to put that 1x right here. Now look at these two. So they don't have any x's over here. They both have a 1 and they both have a 5, but you always pick the greatest number. So what's the biggest number that you see in both of these squares? A 5. So I'm going to take that out. Now when you take out that 5 though, it has to match the sign of the box it touches. So it's going to be a -5. All right, so now let's look at these two squares. Oops. What's left for me to take out of these two squares? What do they both have that I can take out? An x. So I'm going to take that out. And then you see they both have a 3, but we want to get the biggest amount we can get. So what's the biggest that we can get? Excuse me, sorry about that. The biggest we could get is a 9. So we're going to take a 9 out and a 9 out, and that has to be positive. So it factors down to, my factors are x minus 5 times x plus 9. Did everybody pick up homework 4 in the front? Okay, we're doing it out of order. We did homeworks 1 and 2. We're skipping 3. We're going to come back to 3 later. So we're doing 1, 2, and 4. All right, so let's go ahead and take out your notes, and we're going to continue with our graphing. Go to page 11 in your note packet. Need me a little table for my little pop. Use this as my little bootleg table. All right, so there are 3 different ways to write a quadratic function. So we started off talking about standard form. When it's in standard form, we have to find the vertex, use a table. That's what we've been doing. Find our axis of symmetry. Now we're going to move over to this form, which is factored form. When it's in factored form, we have to set these equal to 0, and that's going to tell you your x-intercept. So instead of root, remember that a root is the same as your x-intercept. And the reason why it says opposite is because it's always the opposite. That H is there on purpose. It's always the opposite of what you see inside of your parentheses. So let's look at this graph that we have right here. This is the factored form right here. And notice if you were to take that x plus 3 equal to 0, and x minus 5 equal to 0. Let's go ahead and solve those 2 equations real quick. This is page 11. Yes, I'm sorry, y'all. We are skipping a little bit. That's why we skipped over the 3rd. So everybody go to page 11 in your notes. Page 11. So we're doing it out of order. So we're going to skip over lesson 1.3. and come back to it. So we're on page 11 in your notes. Did everybody see this in their note packet? Is this there? Okay. All right. So let's look at this factor form that we have here. This graph, all 3 of these equations are the same. They're the same. equation, or they represent the same graph. It's just three different forms. It's like, you know how you can have a synonym, right? For things that represent the same thing. These three equations all represent the same graph. All right, so let's talk about factor form because that's what we're talking about now. We're talking about factor form in section 1.4. 1.4 is about factoring. So these are the factors. Go ahead and solve both of these factors for x. So I took my first factor, which is x plus 3, set that equal to 0. And my second factor, x minus 5, set that equal to 0. And when I solve it, I got, what would I get? X equals -3 and x equals +5. And I just want you to notice in this graph, do you see where did this graph cross the x-axis? See, it crosses where we thought it would. It crossed at the -3 and it crossed at the +5. Okay, so let's go ahead and start practicing finding our x-intercepts. So this is already factored, so I want you to take each one of these factors. This is a factor and this is a factor. Separate them and set them equal to 0. So let's take our first one, solve that for x. Take the second one and solve that for x. Go ahead and solve both of those for x. So when you solve it, you would subtract the 5. So that would give you x equals -5. That's your first solution. And then for our second one, we would subtract the 3. And x equals -3. On a graph, these would be my x-intercepts. All right, I'm going to skip over this one because this is the same. Let's look at this one down here. This x is a factor, and this x plus 4 is a factor. Let's set them equal to 0. So x equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. This one is already solved for x. So anytime you just take out an x, that means one of your answers is 0. So x equals 0 is one of my answers. For the second one, let's go ahead and solve that. Subtract the 4. And you get x equals -4. All right, and then our last one, let's look at these two. Look at this one and look at this one. Let's go ahead and solve it. 2x plus 1 equals 0. X minus 7 equals 0. For this one, though, we're going to get a fraction. So what's my first step to solve it? Subtract the 1. So 2x equals -1, and then divide by 2. So you get x equals -1/2. That's your first answer. And then my second answer, all we're going to do is add the 7. So x equals 7. All right, so that's just a little solving review. So now let's go to page 12 and start graphing. So the first thing we need to do, we're not going to make a table for this one. We're not going to make a table. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to factor this. So A is 1, B is -6, and C is -27. All right, don't say it out loud, but I want you to find your two numbers. They multiply to be -27 and add to -6. All right, who knows my numbers? What would be my numbers that multiply to be -27 and add to -6? 3 times 9, and which one would be negative, the 3 or the 9? The 9. All right, so we have a -9x and a +3x. Let's go ahead and take out our GCFs. So this would have an x. This we could take out a 3. This one we can take out an x, and this one we can take out a -9. So where it says factors, these are your factors. Your factors are x minus 9 and x plus 3. To find your solutions, though, we don't really have enough room. At least I don't. Set those equal to 0. So set your factors equal to 0. Go ahead and solve those. All right, so we're going to add the 9. So x equals 9 is my first solution. So write that here. And then we're also going to subtract the 3. So x equals -3. All right, go ahead and put a point on your x-axis at -3 and put one at +9. Because remember, a root is the same as your x-intercept. So wherever you say there is a solution, that is where you need to put a point on the x-axis. And now, is this graph going to be a smile or a frown? Which one do you think it's going to be? A smile. So we're going to do a sketch. We're not going to actually make a table. This is a sketch of the graph. We're just going to make a sketch. Make sure it's a smile and it crosses through those 2 points. All right, we'll do one more and then we'll end for today. LaShawn, can you sit up for me, please? All right, I think I'm going to skip over, let me see which one. Let's do 1B. So your very first step is you have to set this equal to 0. All right, so I'm skipping over, I'm at 1B. So do you see how we have these two on the left, on the right side? I need to bring them over. So we need to subtract the 8x. And then we also need to add the 4. They didn't really give us a lot of space here. So, so when we do that, we get 1x squared. And then what do you get here? What is 6 minus 8? If you're not sure, use your calculator. 6x minus 8x. Negative 2x. And then negative 7 plus 4. Negative 3. So now this equals 0. So we're ready to factor. So let's go ahead and make our x. Negative 3 goes on the top. Negative 2 goes on the bottom. We're going to factor this out. Go ahead, find your two numbers that multiply to negative 3 and add to negative 2. Thumbs up when you know my numbers. 1, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. Anybody want to volunteer? What you get for those numbers? There's only one thing we can multiply to get 3, though. The only thing that multiplies to give you 3 is 1 times 3, right? So we got a 1 and a 3. Which one is going to be negative, though? The 3. All right, let's go ahead and take out our GCFs. So in this row, I could take out an x. In this row, I'm taking out a negative 3. See how they both have a negative 3. And then in this first column, I'm taking out an x. And the only thing that I can take out of these two is a what? What do you think I'm taking out of these two? Show me with your finger. What number would you take out? A 1, yeah. So where it says factors, I want you to write your factors. X minus 3, x plus 1. And now let's go ahead and solve it. Set both of those equal to 0. And you get x equals 3 and x equals negative 1. So those would be your roots. Go ahead and plot a point there. Plot a point at negative 3. Plot a point at negative 1. Oh, sorry, I messed up. Not negative 3. That should be a positive 3. X is positive 3 and x is negative 1. So put a point at negative 1. Put a point at positive 3. Now, is that going to be a smile or a frown, this graph? A smile. So we're just going to make our sketch. This is not an accurate. Now, the way we were graphing it before, that was an accurate graph. A sketch means it looks like it's similar, but it's not the exact graph. All right, any questions about that? So everyone picked up homework 4. Can you write the due date? The due date for homework 4 is Tuesday, August 20th to get full credit. So I'm getting ready to pass back some homeworks and skills checks to you. Go ahead and feel free to get started on homework 4. We're going to keep working on this for a while, though. So we're going to practice tomorrow and Monday also.